The terminal buzzed with the tired heartbeat of too many lives in transit. A blend of stale coffee, polished floors, and recycled air thick with impatience. You could practically taste the exhaustion drifting above the crowd. Gate 72B at LAX was just another corner of organized chaos. Rolling bags, snoring travelers, screens blaring layers of delay notifications. I sat slouched in a cracked leather chair that had seen better decades, hoodie pulled over my head, sunglasses on, the portrait of a man trying to disappear. To anyone watching, I was Fred Monk. Harmless, boring. Mid-level consultant flying home after another beige presentation about quarterly projections. But inside, behind the quiet expression and average clothes, I was Federal Air Marshal Fred Monk, and my real job was simple. Make sure this metal tube full of strangers touched down safely in Denver instead of the nightly news. They'd flagged this route for anomalies. That's the bureaucratic way of saying the math didn't like it. Too many diversions, too many unruly passengers. Little red blips in data no one could explain. Usually, assignments like this end the same way. Long hours, cheap coffee, listless observation, and a mental catalog of humanity's worst airplane habits. But you stay ready because danger doesn't announce itself. People assume my job's fireworks and heroics. The truth is, it's 95% boredom and 5% heart-racing chaos that can burn you out faster than caffeine. My best friend Dave thinks I'm some sort of skybound cowboy. He teaches 8th grade history in Baton Rouge and gets more drama from middle school essays about the Louisiana Purchase than I do from most flights. I tried telling him that real danger hides behind silence, in the nervous laugh of a man gripping his briefcase, in the trembling hand of a woman who can't quite fasten her seatbelt. And then she happened. Karen Tillman. I didn't know her name yet, but that didn't matter. Some people announce themselves before they even speak. She cut through the gate area like a wildfire through dry brush, leaving irritation in her wake. Tall, manicured, confident in a way that smelled more of self-importance than self-assurance. Her voice was honed, polished, loud enough for attention, sharp enough to wound. A sparkling phone gimbal glimmered in her hand. The camera pointed directly at her flawless outrage. "And you will not believe the incompetence at this counter," she declared to whatever invisible followers tuned in. "They weighed my carry-on. My carry-on!" As if I don't know the rules. Heads turned in irritation. Others ducked lower behind screens, desperate not to get pulled into the show. A gray-haired man across from me muttered, "Is she rehearsing?" I murmured, "Off-Broadway." "Extremely off," he snorted. "Hope it's a short performance." "Depends on the audience," I said. And sure enough, the audience was forming. Phones tilted upward. Lenses waiting for her next act. She was magnetic in that awful way some disasters are. Too loud to ignore, too entitled to stop. People like her live convinced that the universe itself is customer service, and the rest of us are just standing in line behind them. My Uncle Peter used to say, "Some folks walk through life thinking they're the only ones with a script." Karen Tillman wasn't just the star. She was the writer, director, and unchallenged diva of her own drama, and we were all unpaid extras trapped in her production. When the gate agent called Group 1, Karen lunged forward before human thought could intervene. Her shiny carry-on bulldozed past an elderly couple who had the audacity to exist in front of her. She flashed her boarding pass like a royal charter. I waited with Group 2, quietly blending into the blur of yawning travelers. That's rule number 1 in my line of work. Blend so well you forget yourself. From hoodie to sneakers, every inch of me screamed mediocrity. By the time I reached the jet bridge, the recycled air was already tinged with disinfectant and the weary smile of people doing their best. I nodded politely at the attendants, felt that subtle switch inside, from traveler to operative. Karen had claimed her throne in 1C. Front row, aisle seat, her phone still propped up to capture her grievances for the world. The flight attendant's expression was professional, but her eyes begged for mercy as Karen chided her about pre-departure champagne. "What is the point of status?" she said loudly, "if there's no service?" My assigned seat was 2A, aisle. Perfect placement, 1 row back, clear sight of both the galley and the cockpit door. It's the invisible sweet spot for someone like me. Near enough to act, far enough to vanish afterward. As I moved past, my duffel bag may have brushed the air near her shoulder. Maybe didn't. Her head snapped around, eyes scanning me top to bottom like she was grading a test she didn't expect me to pass. "Of course," she said, her tone sliding like oil. "People like that don't usually sit in first." She waited a beat, savoring it. "I just hope you know how to behave." The elderly woman she'd cut in line earlier leaned forward. "Honey," she whispered just loud enough. "He looks cleaner than your soul," her husband added dryly. and better shoes. The first-class cabin rippled with quiet chuckles, but I didn't move, didn't react. Inside, a cold spark flared, the part of me that loves a sharp comeback. But the badge beneath my jacket reminded me why silence works better than pride. I held her gaze for half a heartbeat, neutral and unreadable, before stepping past and seating myself. Seatbelt clicked. Calm face on. Observe. Don't feed the fire. But I felt it, that question humming at the base of my skull. What makes people think they're untouchable? Money? Followers? A false sense of power delivered by Wi-Fi and adoration? Karen Tillman believed she floated above rules carved for the rest of us. She had no idea that sitting in 2A, 3 feet behind her, was the exact rule she couldn't break. The doors hadn't even closed, and already she was the biggest variable, a living disruption in a sealed metal tube flying 7 miles above Earth. She was tinder. I was the extinguisher with timing and authority. She was the storm. I was the lightning rod, quiet but precise. A soft chime rang, the kind passengers mistake for a service call. To a trained ear, it meant coordination. Leah, the purser, glided down the aisle, calm carved into every gesture. I'd flown with her half a dozen times before. Competent, steady, the kind of professional who doesn't freeze when chaos hits. She stopped beside me but looked past, pretending to address the woman in the window seat. Her voice carried just enough for nearby passengers to overhear. "Mr. Monk, would you care for some pre-departure water? Still or sparkling?" A simple sentence to anyone else, but to us, it was a coded handshake perfected through years of quiet practice. Subtle enough to pass unnoticed, structured enough to confirm everything. "Still is fine," I said evenly. "It's been a long day." The single word was the countersign. Still confirmed my presence, my status, my readiness. We were now officially a 2-person shield between this plane and whatever might unfold. Leah's eyes flickered, the tiniest motion of understanding. "Of course," she said smoothly before gliding away, vanishing into professionalism once more. No one else noticed. They never do. To everyone around us it looked like ordinary politeness. Just water. Simple, harmless, exactly as it needed to be. But now the most important person on the crew knew who I was and where I was sitting. The first piece was on the board. I pulled out my phone, finding interest in an article, but my mind was already building a 3-dimensional map of the cabin. My seating choice 2A aisle wasn't random. From here, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the cockpit door. I could see the forward galley, the lavatory, and every person who entered or exited that critical space. I was on a row back from our live streaming problem in 1C, close enough to intervene in under a second, but not so close as to signal any special interest. The aisle seat gave me mobility. I wasn't trapped in an incident. Seconds matter, and being boxed in by a sleeping passenger is a liability I could never afford. My training is about angles, sight lines, and minimizing response time. This seat checked every box. If I breathe on the cockpit door, I could fog the paint, not planning to. Good boundaries. My eyes scanned the cabin, not as a passenger, but as a predator assesses a new environment. I wasn't looking for threats in the traditional sense. Not yet. I was cataloging people, assets, and liabilities. In 3D, a big man with a military-style haircut sat ramrod straight. His hands were clean, his knuckles solid. He had the calm, watchful eyes of a man who has seen real trouble and wasn't impressed by it. He was an asset. I mentally tagged him Marcus. Across the aisle in 3C sat a man who was the polar opposite. He was sweating despite the cool cabin air. His eyes darted around nervously, but they always came back to Karen in 1C. He was with her, a partner, a liability. The junior flight attendant, a young man named Rory, was already looking overwhelmed. Karen had snapped at him twice about her non-existent drink, and he was flustered, apologizing profusely. He was a weak link, someone who could be intimidated or manipulated. This is the part of the job that Dave would find excruciatingly boring. It's a mental spreadsheet of human behavior. You watch, you catalog, you build a profile of the flight. Every trip is a new equation, a sealed tube filled with variables. My job is to solve the equation before it flies apart. Most flights, the answer is simple. Everyone behaves and we land safely. But you can't assume. You have to prepare for the outlier, for the variable that refuses to conform today. That variable had a name in a live stream. I thought about Dave trying to manage 30 teenagers who think history is just a bunch of dead guys. He has to deal with this kind of entitlement every day, albeit in a less concentrated form. He says the key is finding the leverage, the one thing they care about more than their own ego. For a teenager, it might be a grade or a spot on the basketball team. For Karen, I suspected it was her audience, her perceived status. The very thing that made her feel untouchable was also her greatest vulnerability. She was performing for them. That performance had rules, and if she broke them, the audience might just turn on her. I settled back into my seat, projecting an aura of weary indifference. Inside, I was a coiled spring. The cabin was a chessboard. I knew where the king was behind the reinforced door at the front. I knew who the queen was, the loud, disruptive woman in row 1. I had identified my knight, the steady ex-military man in 3D, and a potential pawn in the nervous man in 3C. Leah was my rook, controlling the board from the galley. The game hadn't started yet. We were still on the ground, a fragile illusion of civilization holding strong, but we would be taking off soon. And at 35,000 FT, the rules change. The board shrinks. There are no easy exits. I had my mental map. I had my assets and liabilities cataloged. And I had one very loud, very predictable problem in 1C. A woman who believed her own hype. The pre-flight announcements began. A soothing drone of safety instructions that 90% of the passengers ignored. I listened to every word. The real test wasn't on the ground. It was up there in the thin, cold air where help is minutes away and trouble is only ever a heartbeat from your door. The jet bridge pulled away with a low groan, and the plane began its slow, lumbering push back from the gate. This was the first major transition point. The moment we went from being a room connected to a building to a self-contained vessel. It's a psychological shift for everyone on board, but especially for someone like Karen. On the ground, she could in theory be removed. The gate agent, the ground crew, airport police, they were all still within reach. Once that door closed and we were under federal jurisdiction, the power dynamic shifted. She seemed to understand this, and it made her bolder. As we taxied toward the runway, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, reaching for the overhead bin. "Excuse me, ma'am," Leah said, appearing instantly at her side. "You need to be seated with your seatbelt fastened for taxi, takeoff, and landing." Karen waved a dismissive hand, not even looking at her. She was addressing her phone, which was still perched on the tray table, still recording. "You see this? This is the kind of power-mad nonsense you have to deal with. I just need my hydrating face mist. My skin gets so dry on these flights." Leah's voice remained calm but firm. "Ma'am, it's a federal aviation regulation. I need you to sit down and buckle up now." Karen finally turned to Leah, her eyes flashing with anger. "Do you know who I am? I have over 2 million followers, one post from me, and this airline stock will tank. Now, are you going to let me get my face mist? Or do I have to make this a bigger issue?" A gate agent stepped on, issued a formal misconduct warning, and she went quiet long enough for the door to close and push back to start. This was the test, a classic power play. She was probing the system, looking for the weak point. She was using her perceived influence as a weapon against a flight attendant just doing her job. The nervous man in 3C visibly shrank in his seat as if trying to disappear. The young flight attendant, Rory, who was working the galley, looked terrified. Leah, however, didn't flinch. She was a pro. "I know you're frustrated, ma'am, but the rules are for everyone's safety, including yours. We can't proceed to take off until you are seated." From my seat, I watched the exchange. My body relaxed, but my mind running through the protocols. If she refused, Leah would have to inform the captain. The captain would then have a choice. Return to the gate or press on. Returning to the gate meant a delay, paperwork, and a major headache for everyone. Some pilots would cave just to avoid the hassle. I hoped this one wouldn't. This was a critical moment. If Karen won this small battle, she would be emboldened to escalate later in the flight. You have to draw the line early and hard. My hand rested on my thigh, loose, ready. I wouldn't intervene over a face mist, but I was prepared for what might come next. Leah held her ground. "Ma'am, please sit down." The please was a courtesy. The tone was an order. Karen stared her down for a long moment, a silent battle of wheels playing out in the aisle of first class. The hum of the engines waiting on the tarmac seemed to grow louder in the tense quiet. Finally, with a dramatic sigh for her audience, Karen slumped back into her seat. "Fine," she snapped, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. "I'll just let my skin shrivel up and die because of your ridiculous petty rules." She slammed the seatbelt buckle into place with theatrical force. Leah gave a crisp, professional nod and retreated to the galley. The crisis was averted for now, but it was a warning shot. Karen had tested the fence and found it electrified. She now knew the crew, or at least the purser, wouldn't be easily cowed. She would have to try a different tactic. The plane turned onto the active runway, the engine spooling up with a deep, powerful roar. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, smooth and confident. "Flight attendants, please be seated for takeoff." We accelerated down the runway, the cabin vibrating. And then that magical, weightless moment as we lifted into the dark Los Angeles sky. We were airborne. We were a closed system. For the next couple of hours, the only authority that mattered was inside this aluminum tube. Karen had lost her first skirmish. But I knew she wasn't done. People like her don't just give up. They regroup. They re-strategize. Her little outburst wasn't just about face mist. It was about establishing dominance. She had failed, and that failure would fester. As the plane climbed through the clouds, I watched her. She was tapping furiously on her phone, likely crafting a narrative of victimhood for her followers. She was building her case, justifying whatever she was planning to do next. The seatbelt sign pinged off. The game was on. The gate warning stuck for a minute. She pivoted. No more loud. Now it was sneaky. I could feel it in the air, a subtle shift in the cabin's energy. The opening moves were over. Now we were in the mid-aim, and I knew with a certainty that settled like a cold stone in my stomach that she was just getting started. The first hour of the flight passed in a deceptive calm. The beverage service started a ritual of normally designed to soothe nervous flyers and pass the time. Karen accepted a glass of champagne with the air of a monarch bestowing a great favor, making a show of inspecting the glass for spots before taking a sip. She kept her phone recording, providing a running commentary on the subpar service and the questionable quality of the complimentary nuts. When service moved on, she palmed a silver flask and a couple of anxiety pills, dosing between takes. Not airline service, her own stash. I declined a drink, taking another bottle of water instead. Hydration and vigilance are the only two things I need in the air. I kept my focus split, one part of my brain listening to the low hum of the engines and the rhythm of the cabin, the other part watching her. She was communicating with the nervous man in 3C. Not with words, but with subtle glances. A slight nod, a fractional tilt of her head. He would look at his phone, then quickly look up at her, then look away. They were coordinating. This wasn't a solo act. That changed everything. A lone disruptor is one kind of problem. A coordinated team is another entirely. My internal threat level ticked up a notch. Just as we were passing over the desolate, dark expanse of the Nevada desert, it began. A frantic series of dings from the flight attendant call button echoed from the back of the plane. Not just one press, but a rapid panic sequence. Ding, 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 ding. Rory, the young flight attendant, hurried down the aisle from the forward galley. Leah was right behind him. I leaned out into the aisle slightly, my view tracking them as they disappeared into the economy cabin. A moment later, a passenger in the coach section stood up and shouted, "Is there a doctor on board? Someone's having trouble breathing." The classic script. It could be real, of course. Medical emergencies happen all the time, but the timing felt wrong. It felt convenient. My eyes snapped back to Karen. She hadn't even turned around. She just sat there sipping her champagne, a faint knowing smile on her face. She knew this was going to happen. This was her move. The diversion, the chaos she needed to cover her real objective. Suddenly, the captain's voice came on, calm and authoritative. "Folks, we seem to have a bit of light chop up ahead. I'm going to turn the seatbelt sign back on. Please return to your seats and make sure those belts are securely fastened." The plane began to buck gently, a rhythmic swaying motion, light turbulence. Not dangerous, but just enough to put people on edge. The perfect catalyst. Leah's voice, amplified by the PA system, cut through the cabin. "We have a medical situation in row 28. Please, if you are a medical professional, press your call button." A woman in row 15 did. Leah and Rory began the process of moving the heavy beverage cart back up the aisle to clear a path. And that's when Karen's partner in 3C made his move. He stood up, finding a need to use the lavatory. "Sir," Leah said, her voice tight, "the captain has turned on the seatbelt sign. You need to stay in your seat." "It's an emergency," he mumbled, his face pale and slick with sweat. He wasn't a good actor. He pushed past her, heading for the forward lavatory right next to the cockpit door. At the same time, from the back, the other flight attendants started moving the second beverage cart forward. The plan was obvious now. They were creating a pincer movement. The medical emergency in the back drew the crew's attention, and one of the carts. The nervous man's lavatory emergency created a justification for him to be at the front, and the two carts moving toward the middle would effectively jam the aisle, trapping the crew and any helpful passengers in the rear of the aircraft. It was a simple, elegant, and dangerous plan. A kid in 4A tugged his mom's sleeve. "Is this like the safety video?" Mom said, "It's like the part they skip." The kid nodded solemn. They should unskip it. The light shop was getting a little heavier now, the plane jostling more insistently. The pieces were moving into place, exactly as she'd designed. I stayed put, just another passenger mildly annoyed by the chop. But my heart rate was up, my senses on high alert. I watched the nervous man lock himself in the forward lavatory. I watched Karen take another delicate sip of her drink, the picture of unconcerned luxury. She was the director and her play was unfolding perfectly. The aisle was blocked. The crew was distracted. The passengers were strapped in and looking back toward the commotion in coach. All eyes were pointed away from the front of the plane. All eyes except for mine. She had created her moment, a pocket of manufactured chaos in the sky, and now I knew she was about to use it. The fake medical was the feint. The cart jam was the trap. But what was the real attack? My gaze fixed on the cockpit door. That had to be the target. It's always the target. The question was no longer if something was going to happen, but when. And I was the only person in a position to stop it. With the cabin's attention focused on the drama unfolding in coach, Karen made her move. It was slick. She slid out of her seat, clutching her empty champagne flute, and moved toward the forward galley. Her movements were fluid, disguised as someone simply wanting a refill. Rory, the young flight attendant, was still in the back with the medical issue. Leah was coordinating her back to the front of the plane. The galley was momentarily empty. It was the window of opportunity Karen had engineered. Rory popped forward for 2 seconds and she pounced. "Refill or I'll tag you by name." Rory glanced at Leah's back, swallowed, and retreated. Karen smiled like she'd moved a pawn. She was playing a different board than the rest of the cabin. I didn't move a muscle, but my entire being was focused on her. I watched her in the reflection of the darkened cabin window, a distorted fisheye view of her actions. She steadied herself against the bulkhead as the plane swayed, playing the part of a passenger struggling with the turbulence. Hearies, however, weren't on the floor. They were darting around the galley, cataloging everything. Her target was a small, unassuming crew bag tucked beside the purser's jump seat. Inside that bag were Leah's personal effects and a galley service key, handy for carts and cabinets. The cockpit door uses a keypad and deadbolt. A card won't open it. My training screamed at me to move, to intercept her before she could even get close. But protocol is clear. No reveal until an overt act. Reaching for a galley key isn't a breach. Using it would be. Revealing my presence too early could spook her, cause her to escalate in unpredictable ways or simply deny everything, and paint me as the aggressor. My job wasn't just to stop the threat. It was to do so with the least amount of disruption and risk to the other passengers. So I waited. I watched her reflection. She leaned over, pretending to pick something up off the floor. Her hand, quick as a snake, darted out toward the key. It was a simple lift, the kind a pickpocket might use in a crowded subway. Her fingers brushed against it. My muscles tensed. I was halfway out of my seat, my body preparing to launch across the aisle. And then at the last possible second, Leah turned. She must have had a sixth sense, a feeling that something was wrong. She took 2 quick steps back into the galley. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Leah's voice was pure ice. Karen snatched her hand back, straightening up with a flustered but defiant look. "I was just getting another glass of water," she lied, her voice a little too high. "And I thought I dropped an earring." Leah's eyes narrowed. She didn't buy it for a second. She glanced down at her bag, then back at Karen. The silent accusation hung in the air between them. Leah knew what Karen had been about to do, and Karen knew that she knew. The medical emergency was still in progress in the back, but the real front line was now right here in this tiny, claustrophobic galley. "The seatbelt sign is on," Leah said, her voice low and dangerous. "Get back in your seat now." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than arrogance in Karen's eyes. It might have been fear, or maybe just the raw frustration of being thwarted again. She shot a venomous glare at Leah, turned on her heel, and stalked back to her seat, her mask of untouchable superiority firmly back in place. She sat down and immediately started typing on her phone again, her thumbs a blur of fury. She had failed to get the key. Phase 1 of her plan was a bust, but the nervous man was still in the forward lavatory. The ISIL was still blocked. The diversion was still active. This was just a setback for her, not a defeat. I settled back into my seat, letting out a slow, controlled breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. It had been close, too close. My assessment of Leah went up another 10 points. She was sharp, aware, and not intimidated. A critical asset. But now Karen was exposed, at least to the crew. The pretense was gone. She had shown her hand. I thought about the core question again. What makes someone think they're untouchable? It's the belief that no one is watching, or that if they're too scared or too powerless to act. Karen had just learned that Leah was watching and she wasn't scared. Now she would have to assume someone else might be watching too. This would make her more desperate, more reckless. The failed galley key lift wasn't the end of the incident. It was the trigger for the next more dangerous phase. She couldn't get the key. So now she'd have to find another way to open that door. And with her partner waiting just a few feet away, that meant force. The quiet part of the operation was over. The loud part was about to begin. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, cutting through the low murmur of the cabin. "Folks, Tower has advised us of some unexpected severe turbulence ahead. We're going to try and climb over it, but it's going to be a bumpy few minutes. Flight attendants, take your jump seats immediately." His tone was calm, but the word severe is not one pilots use lightly. It was a genuine warning, as if on cue the plane dropped. It wasn't a gentle dip. It was a sickening lurch, the kind that lifts you out of your seat and sends your stomach into your throat. A collective gasp swept through the cabin. Outside the window, the world was blackness. We were flying blind into a pocket of violent air. The beverage cart, which Leah had been trying to secure in the galley, broke free from its latch. It careened across the small space, slamming into the forward bulkhead with a crash that echoed through the silent cabin. A full bottle of red wine that had been on the top shelf flew into the air, hung there for a surreal half-second, and then shattered against the galley wall. The sound of breaking glass was sharp and loud, a gunshot in the tense quiet. A spray of red arced across the galley wall. Not blood, Merlot. The smell hit fast, sweet and wrong, like a winery inside a washing machine. I saw it immediately. A large, jagged shard of dark green glass, the neck of the bottle, lay on the galley floor. It was thick, heavy, and wickedly sharp. It was a perfect improvised weapon. Karen's eyes locked onto it. The frustration and danger in her face melted away, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. This was an opportunity, a gift from the chaotic sky. The turbulence had given her something her plan had lacked, a weapon. The plane shuddered again, a violent side-to-side tremor that rattled the overhead bins. A few people screamed. The medical emergency in the back was instantly forgotten. Real fear, raw and primal, had taken its place. Leah was strapped into her jump seat, her face pale but composed, her eyes also fixed on the broken glass. She knew what it represented. Rory in the back was out of sight. Marcus, the ex-military man in 3D, had his hands braced on the seat in front of him, his jaw set, riding out the turbulence like a man who had been through worse. The nervous partner was still locked in the lavatory. The entire cabin was frozen, caught between the violence of the weather outside and the new sharp threat lying on the galley floor. My training is to use the environment, to see everything as a potential tool or a potential threat. The broken bottle was now the single most dangerous object on the plane. In the tight confines of an aircraft, a blade, even a crude one, is a terrifyingly effective weapon. It can be used for intimidation, to take a hostage, to try and force a way into the cockpit. Karen's plan had just evolved from one of stealth and deception to one of open violence. She was no longer trying to trick her way in. She was going to fight her way in. The plane dropped again, harder this time. The lights flickered, and for a heart-stopping second the cabin was plunged into total darkness before the emergency lights kicked in with a dim, eerie glow. In that brief moment of blackness, I saw her move. Unbuckling her seatbelt under the cover of the jolt, she was half out of her seat, Heres gleaming in the faint light, still fixed on that piece of glass. She was going for it. The balance of power had shifted in an instant. Before, it was a contest of rules and authority. Now, it was about to become a physical confrontation. She felt untouchable because of her status. Now she felt powerful because she had a weapon within reach. The turbulence wasn't a hindrance to her plan anymore. It was the perfect cover. People were scared, disoriented, and strapped to their seats. The crew was locked in place. No one could stop her. No one except me. The time for quiet observation was over. The moment I had been preparing for, the reason I was on this flight, had arrived. She was unbuckled. The weapon was on the floor, and her partner was feet from the cockpit door. This was the final overtact. And as she lunged for the broken bottle, I knew I had to move, turbulence or not. The safety of everyone on board now depended on what happened in the next 5 seconds. The laboratory door flew open. The nervous man, his face a mask of sweaty desperation, surged out. He wasn't heading back to his seat. He launched himself at the cockpit door, his hands clawing at the seam, his shoulder ramming against the reinforced panel. The door didn't flex. It's a fortress by design. Shoulders bounce, bolts don't. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pure panic. Let us in now. At the exact same moment, Karen, moving with surprising speed, scooped the jagged neck of the wine bottle off the galley floor. She held it like a dagger, its sharp edge glinting in the dim emergency lights. Glass cuts people, not steel. He hammered the door. She guarded the aisle, two-pronged, live. The passengers in the first few rows recoiled, their fear of the turbulence replaced by the stark, immediate terror of the assault unfolding before them. Leah, trapped in her jump seat by the seatbelt and the violent motion of the plane, could only watch in horror. It was the nightmare scenario. A coordinated, violent attempt to breach the cockpit at 35,000 F during a severe weather event. There was no more time for subtlety, no more blending in. I moved. As the plane bucked, I used the momentum, unbuckling and launching myself across the aisle in a single fluid motion. I landed in a crouch between Karen and the cockpit door, putting my body squarely in her path. She sized me up. "Security in a hoodie?" I said, Budget cuts, then louder. Federal Air Marshal. The joke evaporated. The orders stayed. Federal Air Marshal, I yelled, my voice cutting through the chaos. Drop the weapon. Get on the ground. The words were automatic, drilled into me over hundreds of hours of training. You announce yourself. You give a clear, direct command. It removes all ambiguity. At the same time, I reached into my jacket and pulled out my credentials and badge, holding them up high for Leah and anyone else to see. Karen froze for a split second, her eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't in her script. The gray, forgettable man from 2A wasn't supposed to be a factor. That moment of hesitation was all I needed. I also needed to control the aisle behind me. I couldn't fight forward and worry about my back. I locked eyes with Marcus, the ex-military man in 3D. He was already unbuckling, his face grim and focused. He had recognized a command voice when he heard one. You, I shouted, pointing at him. Block the aisle. Nobody gets past you. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He nodded once, a sharp, affirmative gesture, and moved his large frame into the center of the aisle, turning to face the rest of the cabin. Smile for the live stream, big guy, I said. He didn't. That's why I liked him. He became a human wall. He was deputized. The cabin was now secure behind me. The nervous man at the cockpit door ignored me, still pounding his fists against the metal. They're not listening! He shrieked at Karen. Do something! Karen snarled, snapping out of her shock. She raised the broken bottle, her knuckles white. You're not real, she hissed at me. You're nobody. Get out of my way! She lunged, not at me, but toward the cockpit door, trying to get around me to help her partner. The plane lurched violently to the side. I rode the motion, staying balanced on the balls of my feet. She was clumsy, fueled by rage and adrenaline, not training. I didn't need to be stronger. I just needed to be smarter. I wasn't focused on the weapon. I was focused on the hand that held it. The threat isn't the object. It's the intent behind it. And her intent was crystal clear. She wandered through the door. The passengers were screaming now. The cabin, which had been a space of relative order minutes ago, had descended into pure chaos. The lights flickered again. The man kept hammering on the door. Karen was poised to strike, and I was standing in the middle of it all. The last line of defense between 180 souls and the abyss. The time for talking was over. It was time to end this. As Karen lunged, I moved inside her attack. Standard procedure is to create distance. But in the narrow confines of a fuselage, that's impossible. You have to crowd the attacker, foul their range of motion. I sidestepped her clumsy slash, my left hand shooting out to clamp down on her right wrist, the one holding the glass. My thumb pressed hard into the nerve cluster on the back of her hand, while my fingers wrapped around her wrist bone. It's a simple pain compliance technique, incredibly effective. Her eyes widened in shock as a jolt of pure white-hot pain shot up her arm. Her grip on the bottleneck faltered. Her breath hit my cheek, sharp with fake vanilla vape and cheap bubbles. You can't, she started. I can, I said, and turned her wrist to clean 90. Drop it, I said, my voice low and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos around us. She tried to pull away, but my grip was like steel. With my other hand, I twisted her arm, forcing her wrist into a lock that bent her body forward, off balance and helpless. Her arrogance evaporated, replaced by a squeal of pain. The glass shard clattered to the floor. I kicked it under a seat, out of reach. Leah slid me a bio bag. I scooped the glass in with a napkin, sealed it, and marked the time. Evidence travels better than rumors. On your knees, I commanded, applying more pressure. She had no choice. She sank to the floor, whimpering. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. With Karen neutralized, I turned my attention to her partner. He was still frantically beating on the cockpit door. Sir, on the ground now. He glanced back, saw Karen on her knees with me, controlling her, and his fight collapsed. He was a follower, not a leader. Without her driving him, he was just a scared, sweaty man. He slid down the cockpit door and put his hands on his head, sobbing. Just like that, the immediate threat was contained. Now control had to be established. Back in row 28, the patient made a speedy recovery the second the aisle cleared. Performance over. I pulled a set of soft flex cuffs from my pocket. Leah, I yelled. Cuffs. She was already out of her jump seat, the worst of the turbulence having passed. Per SOP, she waited for the jump seat release call before moving, smart and steady. She grabbed another set of cuffs from the emergency kit. I secured Karen's hands behind her back, pulling the plastic tight. Leah, guided by my instructions, did the same for the man. He offered no resistance. Now they were restrained, but I couldn't leave them in the aisle. I hauled Karen to her feet. We're moving, I said. I propelled her back toward her seat in row 1. I pushed her into the window seat, the one furthest from the aisle. I used the seatbelt, looping it through her cuffs and around her waist, cinching it tight. It's a field expedient restraint, turning the seat itself into part of the containment system. She couldn't stand up. She couldn't reach anyone. She was secure. She spat words instead. You're done. I'll end your career live. I nodded at the dead camera on her tray. Low battery, I said. Like your plan. Leahan Marcus, who was still holding his position like a rock, helped me move the man to the seat next to her. We did the same thing with his seatbelt. Now the two of them were secured side by side in the first row. The entire operation was done quickly, quietly, and with as much professionalism as we could muster. The passengers watched in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of fear and relief. A guy in a suit raised a hand. So, refunds, Leah said. Sir, we're giving you life. He nodded. Fair. The kid in 4A gave me a thumbs up. 10 out of 10 wrist twist. His mom winced. We don't trade wrist twists. Okay, he said, thinking. 10 out of 10 safe landings, I said. That's the only rating I collect. The threat was over. The order was restored. I stood in the aisle, taking a deep breath. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I did a quick scan of the cabin. No one appeared injured. The crew was safe. The cockpit was secure. I keyed the intercom button in the galley. This is the onboard Federal Air Marshal. The situation is under control. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. The flight crew is safe, and we will be on the ground shortly. I looked at Leah. She gave me a shaky but grateful nod. I looked at Marcus. He was still standing guard. I gave him a slight nod. You can stand down. Thank you. A nervous voice from 1D. Marshal, should we keep our shoes on? Yes, I said, in case the floor tries to steal them. A ripple of laughs rolled forward, small but brave. Leah mouthed thanks as she passed with trash bags. Order felt real again. He nodded back and returned to his seat. The quiet hero of the flight. As he sat, I whispered. Owe you a beer, he said. Make it 2. Government salary, I said. 1 and a high five, he grinned. Deal. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a familiar, bone-deep weariness in its place. The fight was over. Now came the hard part, getting this plane down safely. The call to the cockpit was brief and to the point. I used the flight deck phone in the galley, punching in the emergency code. The captain answered on the first ring, his voice tight with tension. What's your status? He asked. There was no preamble. This is Marshal Monk, I said. 2 subjects attempted to breach the flight deck. They are both in custody, restrained and secured in seats 1A and 1C. The cabin is secure. No injuries to crew or passengers. The weapon has been neutralized. I heard a long exhale on the other end of the line. Copy that, Marshal. Good work. We're declaring an emergency and requesting priority landing in Denver. We'll be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. The authorities have been notified and will be waiting for us at the gate. Stand by for a rapid descent. Copied, I replied and hung up. Denver Center cleared US Direct. The captain owned the sky. I owned the cabin. 20 minutes. I had to keep the cabin calm for 20 minutes while we performed what amounted to a controlled fall out of the sky. I turned to Leah. He's bringing us down fast. We need to prep the cabin now. Total compliance, no exceptions, she nodded, her professionalism clicking back into place. The fear was gone, replaced by focused determination. She relayed the orders to the other flight attendants over the crew intercom. The descent began almost immediately. The nose of the plane pitched down sharply, and the engine spooled back to a low whistling idle. The sensation was unmistakable. We were dropping and dropping fast. A murmur of alarm rippled through the passengers. This didn't feel like a normal landing approach. I took the microphone. My voice had to be the calmest, most authoritative thing they had ever heard. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Federal Air Marshal again. As you can feel, we have begun our emergency descent into Denver. Standard emergency descent. Pilots in full control. Stay seated. Belts tight. Ice on the crew. I repeated the message twice. I needed them to focus on my voice, not on the sinking feeling in their stomachs. Leah and her team moved through the cabin with incredible efficiency, checking seatbelts, securing galley items, their faces set and resolute. They were magnificent. They were the thin, brave line between order and panic. I stood my post in the forward aisle, a visible symbol of control. I didn't sit. I wanted the passengers to see me, to see that someone was in charge and unafraid. Hands shot up like a classroom. Sir, should we pray? Someone asked. If it helps you, yes, I said, but also tighten that belt. A college kid. Are we going to die? Not on my shift. Row 5. Can I text my mom? Airplane mode and tell her you love her when we land. Row 2 asked if snacks were still coming. If you behave, Leah said, sweeping past like a general. Laughter rippled, small, human, useful. Karen Tillman started yelling from her seat. A stream of curses, threats, and pronouncements about her lawyers and her millions of followers. She was trying to reignite the chaos to claw back some measure of control. I walked over to her row and leaned down, my face close to hers. I didn't raise my voice. "If you say one more word before we are on the ground," I said, my voice a flat, cold whisper, "I will add interfering with the flight crew and assault on a federal officer to the list of charges you're already facing. That's another 20 years. Your choice." Her mouth snapped shut. Her eyes burned with pure, undiluted hatred. But she was silent. The threat of real specific consequences had finally broken through her shield of untouchability. The ground rushed up to meet us. The city lights of Denver spread out below like a carpet of scattered diamonds. The landing was firm but safe. The pilot greased it onto the runway, and the roar of the reverse thrusters was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. We taxied to an isolated gate where a sea of flashing red and blue lights was waiting for us. The engine spooled down into silence. We were on the ground. We were safe. The flight from hell was finally over. The moment the main cabin door opened, the plane was flooded with the quiet, imposing presence of law enforcement, not airport cops. These were FBI agents and local police in tactical gear. They moved with a silent, coordinated efficiency that was both reassuring and deeply intimidating. 2 agents came directly to me. I showed them my credentials again. "Marshal Monk, the subjects are in 1A and 1C. They're all yours." The lead agent nodded. "Good work, Marshal. We'll take it from here." They uncuffed Karen and her partner from the seats and replaced my flex cuffs with steel ones. An agent eyed my hoodie. "Dress code camouflage," I said for Karen's. He didn't laugh. Agents rarely do. I took the win anyway. Karen didn't say a word. Her face was a pale slack mask of disbelief. The reality of her situation was finally, irrevocably, crashing down on her. The game was over, and she had lost in the most spectacular way imaginable. The other passengers remained seated, their eyes wide, watching the scene unfold. They were witnesses to something they would tell their grandchildren about. The agents led Karen and the man down the aisle and off the plane. As she passed my row, Hirye's met mine. The fire was back. "You have no idea who you've just messed with," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous rasp. "I will own you. People like you." I cut her off. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just spoke the plain, simple truth. "People like me," I said, my voice flattened, devoid of emotion, "are the only reason people like you get to land safely." Her face crumpled. It was the one thing she couldn't argue with. The one fact that invalidated her entire world view. The agents pushed her gently forward and out onto the jet bridge. I watched them go, then turned my attention back to the cabin. My job was almost done. I stayed on board while the passengers deplaned, giving a quiet, formal statement to another agent, detailing the events factually and without emotion. The elderly couple from the gate paused. "Cleaner than her soul," the woman whispered, smiling now. The kid in Fora pressed a pirate sticker into my palm. "It's a badge," he said. "Temporary," I told him. "Like fame," his mom added. We all nodded, strangely in sync. I made sure to praise Leah and her crew, and to name Marcus as a civilian, who had rendered invaluable assistance. They deserved their recognition. When the cabin was empty, I finally allowed myself to sit down. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind an ache in my bones and a profound sense of weariness. It was another Tuesday, another flight, another box checked. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Dave. "Landed yet? How was the flight?" I looked at the message for a long time. I thought about what to write. "You will not believe what just happened or just stopped a hijacking." But that wasn't me. That wasn't the job. The job is to be the gray man, the one no one remembers. So I just typed back, "Landed uneventful." 3 dots pulsed. "Then row of you, man," I typed. "You say that to all your students," he answered. "Only the ones who turn in their homework?" Fair. A week later, I was sitting in a different airport, waiting for a different flight, when I saw her face on a news screen. The story wasn't about her heroic stand against a tyrannical airline. It was about her arrest, the federal charges, the potential for decades in prison. Her live stream, which she had thought was her greatest weapon, had become the prosecution's Exhibit A. The comments were time-stamped, archived, and subpoena-friendly. Fame cuts both ways. It had captured everything: her belligerence, her threats, her coordination with her partner, her assault on the cockpit door. Her own followers, horrified by what they had witnessed, had turned on her, flooding the internet with clips of her meltdown. The airline had revoked her precious Milliam status for life and banned her from all future flights. Leah forwarded me the internal flag. "Do not upgrade. Do not serve alcohol. Do not engage." 3 checkboxes all ticked. Poetry and admin form. In her quest for attention, she had achieved a level of infamy she could never have imagined. She had tried so hard to prove she was untouchable, and in the end had only succeeded in proving how fragile her world really was. My phone buzzed again. It was a message from an internal airline security bulletin. A small petty grace note that made me smile. The FAA had also levied the maximum civil penalty against her, a fine so large it would likely bankrupt her. She had wanted to cost the airline. Instead, she had cost herself everything. I put my phone away, pulled my hoodie up, and leaned my head back, ready for the next flight. The world is full of people who think the rules don't apply to them, and it's full of quiet, tired people like me making sure they